G'day guys, Socket here. Today's episode is going to be on pillar fabrication and aiming. Now, I haven't done a lot of fabrication videos on my channel, and that's mainly because I think there's a bunch of channels out there that does car audio installation and fabrication really well, especially Peter from PSSound, where I learned pretty much all of my installation and fabrication techniques from. His channel has a bunch of stuff covering everything from infinite baffle installs, how to build door pods, and of course, how to fabricate and aim pillars. But the reason I'm making a fabrication tutorial today is because I know a number of you are working on your projects and are at the stage where you're doing your pillar builds. And so I've had a couple of questions about pillars, and so I thought I'd make this video for you guys on this topic today. As I said, the way that I build pillars is pretty much the way that I learnt from Peter from PSSound. So I'm going to put his original tutorials or links to his original tutorials down in the description. But I'm going to try to summarize all of that material up into one video where I walk you through the technique of doing your pillar builds and aiming, and some of the materials and things that are used to create some awesome pillars. So let's go and have a look. So I just want to run through the general steps for your pillar fabrication, and as I said, this is roughly based on the way that I learnt from Peter from PSSound. So step one is about preparing your pillars. So that's removing any clips and foam backing and all this type of stuff, and stripping the material away from the plastic pillar itself, and we'll go into all of that stuff a little bit later, but that's the first step, is to get your pillars all prepared. The second step is then preparing or fabricating a speaker ring or a pod for your tweeter that you're going to then use to hold the speaker and build that into the structure of your pillar. So that's step two. Step three is then aiming that speaker ring or pod. Now, I'm not going to go through speaker aiming and beaming and all that stuff. That's been covered in a previous tutorial, but that is step three, getting the orientation of the speaker ring correct on both the right and left hand sides of the car. The next step is then marking up and cutting any holes. The holes are to countersink the tweeter pods, or the hole to allow the mid-range speaker to vent the back wave. There's going to be some form of cuts that need to be made into the speaker, into the pillar, and so that is step number four. The next step is then building up a framework around the speaker ring or pod that's going to form the scaffolding or the skeleton for which you're going to be applying your Fiberfill or body filler to. So we call that or Peter calls that the jigsaw method, and that'll make a bit of sense when we get to that step. The next step is then, once we've got that jigsaw or framework built up around the pod or the speaker ring, we're then going to then apply some body filler. And that's going to be a pretty rough coat just to fill in all the gaps and give us a general shape or structure of the pillar that we want, right? And then we're going to let that set, and then we're going to sand that back to make it as smooth as we can, and we're then going to apply a second coat to fill in any dips, any scoops and things like that, any holes or dips in the surface, and and apply a second coat so that we start to build up the shape that we want. We're going to let that dry, and then we're going to sand that back. But before we go on, we're then going to treat the internal surfaces of the pillar. So we generally apply a resin or something to fill in the gaps of the wooden framework from inside the pod itself. Peter talks about this material called milkshake, which is basically a resin with metal filings or something to give weight to the pillars. That's certainly one way of doing it. I tend to use just plain old resin to fill in the gaps, and then I use a bit of butyl sound deadening material to give the pillar some weights, some extra weight. That's the way I go about it. But doing some sort of internal treatment to the pillar surfaces is that step. Once we've got that done and that's all dry, we then apply a final coat of Fiberfill, and often this will be what we call a polishing coat or a very smooth coat. I think I mentioned in the video later the brand that I use, which is U-Pol, have a thing called a dolphin finish, which gives you a very, very fine and smooth outer coat. So it's different to the body filler that you're using in the previous two steps. So we apply that final coat and sand that all back to give us the finished pillar surface. Once we've done that, it's time to trim, paint or flock the surface of the pillar. We'll talk about that. And then your pillars are basically done and it's now ready for install. So the following steps is about running wiring up through the middle of the pillars, fitting the pillars into their final position, and then finally installing and connecting up your speakers, right? And then job is kind of done. So that's the basic process that we're going to go through, and let's start off with step one, pillar preparation. Okay guys, let's have a talk about some of the materials and tools that you're going to need to do your pillars. Now, I'm not going to do fancy pillars and with lighting and all this other stuff. I'm just going to talk about standard pillars, for your tweeters and your mids, just functional things and the basic technique for doing them. So first of all, you're going to have to get yourself a spare set of pillars. Of course, you can just use your original pillars, but I wouldn't recommend it because many times I've cut the wrong thing or made a mistake or damaged them in some way, and and then you've got to sort of drive around with no pillars until you get some replacements. So picking up a spare set from eBay or Amazon or car wreckers or something like that is a good idea, and then you have your original set if you ever want to go back to stock or something like that. So these long pillars are clearly for the A pillars, which are up on your windscreen. This odd shaped one is for the C pillar, back near your back window, and you'd be using this if you're doing something like your rear fills, and this if you're going to put your tweeters or your mids or a pair of tweeters and mids on your A pillars. Now the pillars come in two basic types. You have what they call pillars that are lined with a cloth, so you can see that it's been sort of heat tacked around the edge of the plastic pillar itself, and then you have basically a formed plastic pillar. It has no cloth on it, just has a sort of a printed pattern on it. So one question is, should you take the material off your pillars, or can you wrap directly over the pillars? And it really depends on what type of finish that you're going to apply to your pillars. So you have basically three options. You can wrap them in cloth or vinyl or leather or whatever it is that you want to, some sort of material coating, whatever you want to use. The other option is to paint the pillars, and the third option is what they call flocking, which is almost like powder coating your pillars with a flock material. So if you're going to paint or flock them, then you should probably remove the material because you want a nice smooth surface for the paint or the flocking material to adhere to and provide a nice smooth surface. If you're going to material wrap them, it is possible to wrap them without over the top of this material. You won't get as good a result as if you just strip it all back to the plastic. So yeah, my recommendation would be to remove the material if you can, as opposed to wrapping directly over the top of the material, but you know, I know people who do that. All right, the next thing to do with your pillars is you're going to want to sort of remove all the bits and pieces. So you know, this airbag cover on the back, you know, these metal clips and things, you know, any speakers and you know, all of this foam, just strip it all back to the just to the plastic, and pop all these clips and things away, because you will probably use them later when you're going to put the pillars back in place. So one of the trickiest things is how to get this material off your A-pillars if you're going to strip them, and there are several different methods. You can brute force just by pulling and tearing the stuff down. There are some people use rubbing alcohol. Some people use acetone, but you've got to be careful with acetone because the acetone can actually eat into the plastic itself and cause damage. I use a solvent called xylene. Now, it's not the type of thing that you can drink. It's not as bad as benzene, but it's it's a solvent, so you need to take safety precautions, right? Using a well ventilated area, and it's flammable, so you don't want to be near any flames or things like that. But essentially, you can use the xylene and soak the material in the xylene solution. Leave it there for 5 or 10 minutes. Here are a couple of pillars that I treated with xylene before, and you can see the material just pulled straight off. I've still got the backing fluff to remove, but what I do is soak that in xylene as well, leave it there for a little while, and it literally just kind of peels off. But that's the way that I've figured out the best way to remove the backing material. But you just got to be, as I said, a bit careful because it is a solvent and you need to take the proper safety precautions. Okay, now that we have our pillars prepared, we want to talk about mounting a speaker to it, and it really depends on whether you're going to be mounting a tweeter or a mid, or a tweeter and a mid, right? So let's just talk about those two. So if, for example, let's say I'm going to mount this mid onto the pillar somewhere, I mean, I can't just sort of stick it on like that. I'm going to need some sort of mounting ring, right? And mounting rings come in all shapes and sizes. Some people like to 3D print them. But basically, if you're looking at using a mounting ring, the rules of thumb is you want it to be as solid as you possibly can. Something super stiff. The more rigid your pillar and your mounting is, the less energy you'll lose through vibration, and the better your sound response. So you want your mounting ring to be as solid as possible. This is probably a bit flimsy, but you could strengthen it up as you make your pillar. But just a couple of things on the mounting ring. So first of all, solid, but at the same time, when you look at the basket on your speaker, you don't want your mounting ring to be so wide that it actually blocks the basket of the speaker. So if you look at that, there's plenty of breathing room there, right? Heaps of breathing room. But if I was to mount it on, I don't know, something like this, you can see that there's not a lot of space there now, right? Because the flange is way too big. If I put it into something like, will it fit into this one? I think it will. You can see that there's plenty of breathing space. So one thing to keep in mind is the size of your mounting ring flange. Make sure you're not suffocating and stopping the back pressure from escaping from the speaker basket. If you do need to use a wide ring for some reason, then one of the things you can do is actually put a 45-degree baffle, cut a baffle around the edge there to give you more breathing space. The only other thing to talk about with mounting rings is make sure that your speaker is kind of flush with the outside of the ring, like in that configuration, not where the speaker is recessed, like that. Now, while that might look pretty cool, the problem is that the sound wave coming out of the speaker is going to be, this ring is going to interfere with the sound wave coming out. So yeah, better to have your speaker flush mounted, in my opinion. All right, so that's mids. Now, tweeters are a different matter. Generally, when we're talking about tweeters, they are generally in a sealed pod or something like that. You don't need to worry about a back wave generally on a tweeter. Often you may use a mounting ring for a tweeter, but this issue of being the width of the mounting ring is less important with tweeters. And often you'll use something like a pod or something for a tweeter. The only difficulty with that is finding the right hole to cut to get an angle on a pod is often quite tricky. Yeah, but yeah, there's different ways. There are different considerations when you're mounting tweeters to mounting a speaker that requires breathing through the back of the cone, right? And that sort of brings us to the next topic. So once we have our speaker ring made and it's the right size and all of that type of stuff, we're going to sort of figure out how we're going to mount this and aim it. But before we do that, we need to figure out the position that we're going to put it in so that we can cut a hole in the pillar to allow that back wave to escape and not put back pressure on the cone of the speaker itself. Now, when you're getting ready to make cuts and position your speaker ring in terms of aiming, you always need to put the pillar back into the car, in its normal position, and sort of try to test fit it there, right? And there's lots of ways that you can hold this crazy ring in place as you test fit it, and the best way to do that is to use a hot melt glue gun. Okay, so this is a hot melt glue gun. They're pretty cheap to pick up on Amazon or your local Alibaba or wherever it is that you use. Basically they just plug into electrical socket. You put the glue stick in the end there, let it heat up a bit, and you can see we can get a dab of glue coming out the other end, right? But take care, it's hot, so don't burn yourself. The good thing about hot melt glue is it sets super quick, and you can literally, if it's not in the right spot, you can literally pull it apart. It's good for temporarily gluing some things together. So what I'm going to do is just go over here to the little pillar, and I'm just going to hot melt glue that into position and show you how I would temporarily get something in place. Okay, so a bit hard to film and use the glue gun at the same time, but basically all I've done is put a dab of glue, if that is in focus, around the back of the ring, and just held it in place for about 5 or 6 seconds until it's set. And now I can literally pick up that whole thing, and and if it's in the wrong position, it's as easy as just snapping it off and removing the glue, just like that, and I'm good to go again and try it in a slightly different position. If you really want to get fancy, you can get a couple of icy pole ice cream sticks and use them and glue them into position as well, right? And you can do that as many times as you like until you get it right. Generally find that it's 3, 4, 5 times before I get my aiming absolutely correct. The biggest problem at the end of the day is really all the time it takes to put the pillar back in place, and clip it in and take it out and come back to the workbench. That takes a bit of mucking around, but persevere, you'll get the aiming in the right position eventually. Okay, so you can see that I've just glued on a couple of little extra legs just to give that ring some extra support, but to be honest, I can pick up the whole thing. It's pretty strong, and and that's for example our speaker ring, or our mounting ring, is now in the right position for argument's sake. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to figure out where we're going to cut the hole to allow the back pressure from the speaker to vent. Now you want a hole that's somewhere between 40, 60, the size of the back of the speaker cone, so if I was taking, let me just grab a speaker, let's say I'm taking the speaker here, which is just happens to be the same size as the speaker hole. I'm going to want something that's maybe half the size of the hole, so it's going to be a square, something something like that we need to cut out to allow it to vent. But before we start cutting, we're going to have to figure out where the inside and the outside of our framework is going to end up for this particular speaker aiming. So let's have a quick look at that. So the technique that we use is the one that Peter from PSSound uses, and it's the one I learned how to do my pillars using his technique, and he calls it the jigsaw method. And the reason for that is basically what we're going to do is use these icy pole sticks or ice cream sticks and things to build up a framework using the sticks and hot melt glue to build up a sort of an outside case for the tweeter itself. So I'm going to do a bit of gluing and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've glued a few more sticks. Look, it's pretty rough. I'm just sort of doing this for demo purposes and just doing it super quick. I moved the ring just to make it a little easier to attach. But essentially, if you get the general idea, what we're doing is trying to build up a framework around the outside of the mounting ring so that we can figure out where the inside of the pod's going to be, so that we can basically mark it to cut our hole without going to cut something like something like that, maybe even bring it in like this a bit more, something like that. The more breathing space the better, to a point. And so the only thing we need to make sure is on the other side that we're not going to cut through any structural bits, right? So often there'll be these brackets for the clips or or something like that, but it where we've marked out looks to be okay. All right, so that's where we're going to cut, and so the next tool we're going to use is our trusty old Dremel. Now, not everybody has a Dremel, but some way of cutting that out, maybe a tiny jigsaw or a little hand jeweler's saw or something like that. But if you do have a Dremel, happy days. You can sort of use these flat cutting blades. The one I like to use is this rotary tool with a sharp head, and then a little sanding ball or something like that, just to get rid of all the burrs and stuff. So essentially what we're going to do is just sort of work our way slowly in here. That's why I like the little cutting blade like that, and we're just going to cut that little centerpiece out. Okay, we've now got the hole cut and sort of smoothed off a little bit. So next thing we want to do is just double check that the test fitting of the speaker is going to go in there without actually hitting anything. So just popping that in there like that, and let's have a look. Yep, it seems to be clearing that perfectly fine. So that looks pretty good. So test fitting done. What I would normally do is go back to the car and just fit that in carefully to make sure that the speaker aiming still looks fine, and then we'd move on to, I guess, filling in all the gaps with the ice cream sticks and things, and using the hot melt to sort of build up that framework, right? And then we'd be ready to start applying the body filler, and well, let's go and have a look at that next. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is the Fiberfill, or the body filler that we're going to use to sort of fill up all the gaps. So imagine this was all sort of encased in wood. Use your imagination there. So the next thing we're going to do is then coat all of this inside and out with some Fiberfill. And so basically, stuff that they use for car repairs, body filler. then just use something like this Septone car filler, or this what's this, Triton fine body filler or something that's a body filler with a fine fiberglass through it. I use the U-Pole Fiberfill as the main coat. Now all of these packs come with the resin itself and a hardening agent, so it won't set until the two are mixed together. And here's one that I'm just preparing now. So the yellow is the fill material, and the red is a little bit of hardener. Now the more hardener you add, the quicker this this will set, or we call it how hot you're making the mix. So I'm just going to pop some gloves on and we'll mix that up. Okay, so that was a bit hard to show you how I mix it with one hand. So I've just mixed that up, and you can see that it's turned a kind of a orangey colour. I've still got a bit of hardener on the outside there that I could blend in, but yeah, so once you mix it up, you've got about 5-6 minutes before it actually hardens. As I said, the more hardener you add, the quicker it will go off. If you don't add enough hardener, it will never really set. So don't go overboard, but make sure you add enough. Usually the instructions are on the packet. All right, so what we do now is we're going to spread that sort of around the framework, and as you know, if you can imagine, all of these gaps aren't here really. There's wood in between all of these, but you know. So I'm going to add some now, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, well, this is a pretty rough example, but what I've done is basically used a stick and just smeared all of that Fiberfill between the gaps. As I said, if there was wood everywhere, I wouldn't be using as much Fiberfill, and you can see, and I'll just put some photos up to show you what I mean. But essentially, you can see the fibers in this. You know, it's not super chunky, but that's okay. It's going to look really rough when you first do it. Essentially, you coat the entire cone or the pod area that you want to enclose, and when that dries in about 12 hours, it'll be rock solid, and then you'll be able to sand it and then apply the next coat. So you basically sand, apply another coat, allow it to dry, sand again, apply another coat, allow it to dry, sand again. You just keep going through that process over and over until you've got the shape that you're aiming to achieve, and you've got any high spots or low spots all kind of flattened out. And each time I go through that sanding process, I just use a Sharpie to make a circle around dips or bumps or things that I want to sort of treat. And that's why you'll see on some of these photos we've got some black Sharpie marks, you know, indicating where I need to do a bit more work. And then once you've got, you know, it all sort of roughed up and you know, 90% there, then you want to add your final very fine coat of filler, which will get rid of any pinholes and you know, other things that will show up if you're doing painting or flocking. And then once you've given that a final sand down, you're pretty much ready to either trim, paint, or flock your speakers, you know, with its final finish. Okay, so after a bunch of sanding and recoating and other stuff that we just talked about, the last thing I want to touch on is wrapping or finishing off your pillars. Now, there are basically three ways that people do this. One is they can paint their pillars, and if you're going to go down that route, you've got to make sure that your surface is absolutely pristine, because any pinholes or things like that will show up in the paint. And so often when you're doing your pillars, you need to also use a very fine filler. So I think the U-Pole version is called Dolphin Coat or something like that, which is much thinner than the Fiberfill and flows into all the holes and pockets and things like that. Yeah, you want to have a really good finish, otherwise every little mark will show up in your paint. Now, if you're going to paint, the one that I really like is Dulux Duramax. It's a fast drying paint, comes in lots of different colors. It literally dries in 5 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes and it's touch dry, right? I find that really, really good. And if I'm sort of painting stuff, I tend to, hang a little coat hanger or something like that and hang it off a ladder or something like that so that it dries. And don't add too much paint at once, otherwise it will run, so small amounts of paint, but lots of layers, right? Yeah, but anyway, that's painting is one option. The second option that people use is what we call flocking. So essentially they have, it's almost like powder coating your pillar, but with material, right? So it's very fine material particles, and essentially they spray adhesive onto the pillar, and then you spray this flocking material on. Now it's very difficult to get a good finish with flocking. You need a nice even application and even glue application, otherwise it turns out all lumpy and stuff. Once again, you want a really good finish on your pillars, otherwise you'll get artifacts and things from the flocking. So often it's easier, if you're going to get stuff flocked, to take it to a professional. It is a bit tricky to apply. Now the most common way of wrapping pillars is by using material or cloth or vinyl or carpet or something, right? Some sort of material. And the two main things that make this thing successful is how thick and how flexible the material are, right? So you're going to, honestly, in my opinion, you're better off taking it to a car trimming professional, or an upholsterer or something like that, people that can do this properly, because it is pretty tricky. But if you want to have a go at it yourself, by all means. Essentially what you're going to need is some sort of spray adhesive. This one is Car Builders, but any spray adhesive will really do. You essentially want to put down a pretty light layer of adhesive, right? So not too thick. Something like that, and then you're going to sort of lay your material on and sort of smooth it out, right? It's not a very good example, but that's the whole idea of wrapping. And of course the tricky part is getting it over this very complex complex shape. Now there are different glues and things that you can use. This is basically a spray adhesive. Once it's dry, and you can't really remove the material from it. There are other heat activated adhesives which are used in the shoe industry, shoe repair industry or something like that, where you can spray, put your material down, and if you want to move it, you can actually use a hairdryer to soften the glue and then sort of stretch it again. I've had trouble finding a supply of that temperature activated adhesive. If anybody knows where you can get it from, please let us know. That'd be a good find. But okay, let's talk about the types of materials that are available, and that type of thing. So the common ones that you use in car audio are carpets, right? So come in different colors. They're relatively thick. The main problem with using carpet for pillars is that it's not very flexible, right? You need to be able to stretch this thing around shapes, and carpet tends to be not very stretchy, and carpet tends to be pretty thick. So thick materials will potentially crease when you're trying to sort of stretch them and all that type of thing. Good for sub boxes and things like that, where you've got big flat areas, but not so good around complex areas on pillars. And the same kind of applies to your vinyls and leathers. They tend to be pretty thick and not very stretchy. You can get some vinyls that do have a lot of stretch in them, and can be used for doing pillars. Once again, good for flat areas and stuff like that, not so much for complex areas around just mid-base pod or something like that. And then you get to probably your materials. Now they come in different thicknesses. So one special material is headliner fabric, and that's a foamed backed material. Some people use this for pillars because they want to match their headliner. You can do it, but as you can see, it creates a pretty thick layer, and once again, it's difficult to get around these complex shapes with this foamed back headliner material. But it's pretty stretchy, right? Cool. Then you've got some materials. You want to make sure you don't get one that's too lightweight and see-through, but you want something, something like this would be ideal. This is like a speaker cloth, as long as you can't see through it. But no, it's very fine, very thin, and it's super stretchy and super flexible. And this is the type of thing that would be ideally used for your pillar trimming, right? Now, if you're going to do your own trimming, it's much easier to do with two people. One person holding and stretching it, while you smooth out all the kinks and things. Obviously, the flat areas are the easiest, so often you'll start with the complex, curved areas first. Something like this, and then into there, and trimming it. And sometimes you'll need to put a stitch. Like I said, I've had a crack at wrapping pillars. I'm terrible at it, and so I've given up and just basically go straight to the local car trimmer who does them for about $300 for a set. And it's worth every cent, let me tell you. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about trimming pillars. Okay, so that is the basic process for building your pillars. Just to round up today's tutorial, I just want to take you through the pillar build that we have in the little Audi A1 that we've been using for all the tutorials, just to show you how each project is slightly different to the others. So let's go and have a quick look at the Audi front A pillar build. Okay, well, I have these Dyne Audio tweeters that have a massive faceplate, so they needed to be trimmed down. So they need to be first pulled apart, and then my friend Vince put them on his metal lathe and with precision tooled them down to reduce them to a more reasonable size. Then came the speaker aiming. I used some PVC water pipe as my speaker ring, aimed at using some blue tack, and then cut the hole, test fitted the speaker to make sure that it was on axis. Then it was a matter of bogging it up with the Fiberfill, then after a bunch of sanding and stuff, applying the final coat, and then any final little tweaks that need to be made before they were being trimmed. This is the passenger side tweeter, and this is the driver's side tweeter. I think they turned out pretty well. So there you go, guys. That brings us to the end of another tutorial. A bit clunky along the way. I really wish that I was building some real pillars and could take the time to actually show you right from the very beginning to the very end. But I hope you get the general idea, and I hope that was helpful to you guys that are doing your pillar builds. So once again, thanks very much for watching, guys. If you've got any questions, pop them down below. I'll get to you as soon as I possibly can. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next episode.